Welcome to Literary Journeys with River. Today, we will explore the 6th book in the Bridgerton series, titled When He Was Wicked. In this video, I'll present a summary of the most important events in the novel, formatted as a story. It's important to note that this video is just a summary. The full book offers much more detail and depth. Join me as we uncover what happens in this captivating story. Part 1, Chapter 1. In March of 1820, in London, Michael Stirling recalls the pivotal moment in his life when he first saw Francesca Bridgerton. He had spent his life seducing women without committing his heart, but one glance at Francesca left him hopelessly in love. The problem was, Francesca was about to marry his cousin, John. Michael hid his pain behind a facade of joy, continuing his libertine lifestyle. But his unrequited love for Francesca consumed him, knowing he could never have her. Nevertheless, he stayed close to her and John, concealing his feelings. Michael's life was full of ironies. Despite having seduced many women, he had never committed his heart. Now he desired the forbidden, his cousin's wife, his best friend, and practically a brother to him. This desire tormented him, filling him with guilt. At the Kilmartin house in London, Michael observes Francesca and John, happy and in love, which deepens his pain. John and Francesca celebrate their 2nd anniversary, and Francesca, always lively, suggests ideas for the celebration. Michael, hiding his suffering, suggests they go to Scotland. Francesca, with her insight, tries to help Michael, but he remains distant, knowing he could never be with her. John, unaware of Michael's feelings, thanks him for taking care of Francesca and considers him a good friend. The scene ends with Michael accompanying Francesca for a walk. She, cheerful and carefree, is unaware of Michael's inner torment. Despite his suffering, he can't resist being near her, knowing he could never have more than her company and smile. Chapter 2. Francesca Bridgerton had come to know Michael Stirling well, despite his flaws and libertine behavior. It was evident that, although he didn't approach life with the seriousness that she and John preferred, there was something about him that made her appreciate him. Michael had been John's best friend until they married, and in those 2 years, he had also become her confidant. Despite growing up with 4 brothers, Francesca usually felt uncomfortable in the presence of men. However, Michael was an exception. She always felt different from her family, more reserved and careful with her words. She found in John a partner who understood and completed her. When she met him, she felt she had finally found her soulmate. Michael and John were like brothers, having shared everything since childhood. Although John inherited the title and wealth, Michael never showed envy towards him. This generosity of spirit was one of the reasons Francesca loved him so much, even though he always mocked his own flaws. During a nighttime walk, Francesca tried to convince Michael to find a wife, a task he rejected with irritation and amusement. However, in their conversation, Michael showed an intensity that Francesca had rarely seen, revealing that he was not the superficial man he pretended to be. Returning home, Francesca found John deeply asleep and couldn't wake him. Michael, entering the room, immediately knew that John wasn't sleeping. He was dead. Francesca's and Michael's world collapsed in that instant, filling them with pain and confusion. Francesca, in her desperation, tried to wake John, while Michael, unable to console her, held her in his arms. The next day, Michael had to face Lord Winston, a member of the Privileges Committee of the House of Lords, who insisted on knowing if Francesca was pregnant. Michael, still in shock from John's death, rejected the idea of bothering Francesca with such insensitive questions. In his pain, Michael realized that, although he had desired Francesca, he had never wished to inherit the title and responsibility that now fell on him. Francesca, with the strength and resolve that characterized her, tried to carry on with her duties as a widow. Despite his own suffering, Michael realized that she was also in deep pain. Francesca finally revealed to Michael that she was pregnant, news that changed the course of their lives and gave them a glimmer of hope amidst their sadness. Chapter 3. In the St. James mansion, Francesca enjoyed a sunny day in the garden when her mother-in-law, Janet, commented on how healthy she looked. The house had changed a lot since John's death, filling with women, giving it a different atmosphere. Despite being surrounded by family, Francesca felt alone. Even Michael, who had once been her great support, seemed distant. Francesca reflected on her sadness and Michael's absence. He was her closest link to John, and his distance only increased her pain. Despite being accompanied by her mother-in-law Janet, and Michael's mother, Francesca desperately longed for Michael's company and comfort. While talking with Janet, Francesca noticed a small red stain on the cushion of the chair she had gotten up from. Alarmed, Janet observed the blood stain, indicating that something was wrong with the pregnancy. Michael, immersed in his own pain and guilt, had been avoiding the Kilmartin house. He felt that his desire for Francesca, even after John's death, was a betrayal to his cousin. In his Albany apartment, Michael received an urgent message. Francesca had lost the baby. Without thinking, he ran to the Kilmartin house, feeling helpless and not knowing what to do. Upon arrival, Michael was greeted by his mother, Helen, who explained Francesca's shock. Helen informed him that Francesca wouldn't stop crying and had asked for him. Michael, feeling out of place and consumed by guilt, didn't believe he could console her. Even so, he knew he had to try, despite feeling incapable of being the friend Francesca needed. Helen, seeing Michael's internal struggle, tried to give him strength to face the situation. Michael, feeling overwhelmed, firmly denied his ability to help at that moment. Desperate and feeling like a coward, he left, leaving Francesca alone in her pain. Chapter 4. The month following Francesca's miscarriage was a true hell for Michael. Every new duty as the Earl of Kilmartin made him feel like he was pushing John's spirit further away. Soon it would be as if John had never existed, especially now that the baby who would have been his last legacy was also gone. Michael resisted moving into the Kilmartin house. He wasn't ready to face John's absence in every corner and preferred the solitude of his small apartment. But Francesca, desperate for his distance, finally visited him. Seeing her in his apartment, he felt a whirlwind of emotions: surprise, guilt, and repressed desire. Francesca, with tears in her eyes, told him she missed him and accused him of avoiding her. Michael, unable to handle the situation, tried to explain that he didn't know how to console her. Francesca, furious and hurt, demanded that he understand her suffering. The intensity of the conversation increased, and Michael felt more trapped and guilty than ever. In the midst of their shared pain, Francesca confessed her anger and frustration. Michael, unable to bear the emotional burden, finally relented and hugged her, allowing her to cry in his arms. Although he wanted to console her, he couldn't avoid feeling helpless and guilty for still desiring her. The conversation reached a critical point when Francesca mentioned that the baby would have needed a father, insinuating that Michael would have taken that place. That statement broke Michael, bringing him to an emotional breaking point. Michael, with a mix of desperation and anger, yelled at Francesca that he couldn't be John, that he couldn't take his place. He released her abruptly, leaving Francesca scared and bewildered. She, feeling rejected and not knowing what to do, decided to leave. Before leaving, she told Michael that it might be better if they didn't see each other for a while. Back in his study, Michael tried to drown his sorrows in whiskey but realized that alcohol didn't ease his pain. He understood that he couldn't continue like this, and in a moment of clarity, decided he needed to leave. He asked his valet to prepare everything for a trip to India, determined to put distance between him and Francesca to avoid more suffering. Part 2, Chapter 5. Francesca longed to have a baby. This desire had grown over time until she could finally recognize and accept it. It started with a slight pang when reading letters from her sister-in-law Kate, talking about her daughter Charlotte. However, the pain deepened when her sister Daphne arrived in Scotland with her children, filling the house with life and laughter. The difference between the house full of children and the emptiness when they left was overwhelming for Francesca. During her stay in Kent for Christmas, she felt even more alone seeing the family children being taken to bed. This feeling of emptiness led her to decide to change her life. She didn't feel unhappy. She had found a comfortable and pleasant way of life as the Countess of Kilmartin, managing the estate efficiently and without Michael's intervention. However, she wanted a baby, and for that she knew she had to marry again. Although the idea of changing her last name and committing to another man felt strange, she decided to overcome her fear and make the necessary preparations. She decided to go to London earlier than usual to begin the social season and look for a husband. She needed a new wardrobe and was ready to set aside mourning and dark colors to wear bright colors like blue, pink, and crimson. She was determined to start a new chapter in her life. Meanwhile, Michael, who had been in India for 4 years, decided to return to Great Britain. He had found a certain peace in India, away from Francesca, but he knew it was time to return. The work in India had given him a new perspective and a sense of purpose, but the constant knowledge that Francesca was nearby had been a burden on him. Now he hoped to face her and be her friend, though he still loved her deeply. Upon arriving in London, Francesca found a cold and poorly prepared house due to her unexpected arrival. She decided to go to the library, which was warmer and cozier. Entering, she found Michael warming his hands by the fire. The surprise of seeing him was overwhelming, but they tried to maintain a cordial conversation. Michael, for his part, tried to hide his desire for her and maintain a carefree attitude. Francesca expressed her anger at his sudden departure and emotional distance during those years. Michael, feeling guilty and frustrated, apologized. Despite the tension, they both tried to resume their friendship, though the wounds of the past and unresolved feelings complicated the situation. Finally, Francesca offered to give him her bedroom so he could rest, but Michael insisted on staying in the library. The conversation between them revealed that both had changed, but also that there was still a deep connection. Francesca expressed her wish for things to go back to the way they were before when they were inseparable friends. Michael, for his part, tried to accept his new role as Earl and find a way to be close to Francesca without succumbing to his love for her. Francesca said goodbye with a sincere wish for Michael to feel welcome, and he, still struggling with his feelings, also expressed his joy at seeing her again. Both knew that the path to reconciliation would be difficult, but they were willing to try. Chapter 6. When Michael woke up the next morning, the Kilmartin house was already fully stocked and running smoothly. A splendid breakfast awaited him in the dining room, but Francesca was nowhere to be found. When he asked the butler, he handed Michael a note from Francesca explaining that she had moved to her mother's house on Bruton Street to avoid gossip, but invited him to visit. He decided to walk to number 5, enjoying the mild air and the unique sounds and smells of London. As he walked, he reflected on how he felt like a stranger in his own city. India had given him a sense of belonging and purpose, but now, back in London, it felt oddly unfamiliar. Upon arriving at the Bridgerton house, he was warmly received by Violet, Francesca's mother, who insisted he call her by her first name. Violet invited him for tea, and soon Francesca joined them, appearing somewhat stern but pleased to see him. The conversation was smooth and pleasant, as if no time had passed. Michael enjoyed the tea and Violet's stories about an Indian-themed ball she had attended. After tea, Francesca and Michael went for a walk in Hyde Park. The sun was shining, and the weather was pleasant. Francesca commented on how much it felt like old times walking together. Michael mentioned his surprise at discovering Francesca had moved, and she explained her reasoning, expressing her desire not to live in her mother's house any longer than necessary. The conversation turned to Michael's plans now that he had returned, and Francesca suggested he take his seat in Parliament and get married. Michael, somewhat irritated, asked for more time before considering such matters. Francesca joked about the mothers who would fight to marry him off to their daughters, and Michael, though initially reluctant, began to see the humor in the situation. As they walked, Francesca spoke of her desire to travel but suddenly stared off into the distance. Noticing her distraction, Michael asked what she was looking at, and after a long silence, she confessed her desire to have a baby. Francesca's confession left Michael perplexed. He didn't know how to respond to such an intimate and personal desire, especially coming from her, who had always been so reserved about her feelings. As they continued walking, Michael tried to understand the depth of her longing and what it meant to her. Francesca's words resonated in his mind. Her desire to have a baby, a new beginning, was a reflection of his own need to move forward and find renewed purpose in his life. Michael knew that his return to London meant facing not only his own uncertainties, but also supporting Francesca in her quest for happiness and fulfillment. Chapter 7. In a letter from the Earl of Kilmartin to his wife, he describes how he found satisfaction in his work in Madras and how he adopted the European custom of living outside the city. Madras had a particular charm, with its blinding blue sky evoking Greek images. In London, Francesca declared to Michael her desire to have a child, surprising her interlocutor. At 26 and having lost her husband John, Francesca expressed her intention to remarry, not for love, but to have a child. Michael, confused and trying to understand, suggested she would first need a husband, to which Francesca responded that this was why she had returned to London, intending to buy a husband, though she didn't have anyone specific in mind yet. Francesca was determined but also aware of the difficulties she might face, especially considering her previous miscarriage. Michael tried to console her, but she continued to feel a mixture of pain and determination. As they talked, Francesca realized that Michael was very attractive, which both confused and scared her. Back home, Francesca immediately sought out her mother, Violet, to visit the dressmaker and change her half-mourning clothes. During the trip, Francesca asked Violet why she had never remarried. Violet recounted how her husband's sudden death left her stunned, and without any desire to remarry, finding solace in her children and the financial stability her husband had left them. Francesca, in turn, expressed her desire to find someone suitable, though not equal to John, and her fear of dishonoring his memory. Michael, for his part, sunk into a bad mood, dealing with John's memories and belongings that still filled his house. The idea of Francesca remarrying and having children disturbed him, but he realized there was nothing he could do about it. As he wrestled with his emotions, the physical and mental discomfort led him to retire to bed, anticipating a long night of reflections. Chapter 8. Francesca and her family waited for Michael for dinner, but he didn't show up. Francesca was anxious, as the memory of their disturbing encounter in the park was still fresh. Her younger sister, Hyacinth, made disparaging remarks about Michael's reputation, which irritated Francesca, who defended him despite everything. Determined to find out the reason for his absence, Francesca headed alone to the Kilmartin house. Upon arrival, she was greeted by the footman, who confirmed that Michael was at home. Francesca went up to his room and found him sick, bedridden with an alarming fever. He tried to downplay his condition but finally admitted that he suffered from malaria, a disease he had contracted in India. Horrified and worried, Francesca decided to take care of him, despite his insistence that it wasn't necessary. Determined to help, Francesca fetched an extra blanket and wrapped it around Michael, then asked about the medications he needed. She found a bottle of quinine, the remedy for malaria, and ensured it was available for his next fever attack. Michael was grateful for her company, admitting that her presence made the situation more bearable. The next morning, Michael felt somewhat better, though still weak. Francesca, who had spent the night in an uncomfortable chair by his bed, woke up and asked how he felt. Michael explained that the fever came and went every 2 days and that there wasn't much more to do than wait. Francesca decided they should hide the truth from her mother and family to avoid unnecessary worry. Before going home to reassure her mother, Francesca promised to return soon and continue caring for Michael. Despite the difficulties and tension, the situation reinforced the bond between them, showing the depth of their connection and the importance they had for each other. Chapter 9. Hiding Michael's illness wasn't easy. While Francesca and Michael managed to keep the aristocracy away with excuses about settling into the new house, controlling the servants and the Bridgerton family was much more challenging. Hyacinth, with her insatiable curiosity, constantly questioned why Francesca visited the Kilmartin house every day. Francesca tried to divert attention and avoid questions, but her sister was relentless. The situation worsened when Violet, Francesca's mother, decided to accompany her to the Kilmartin house. Violet wanted to see Michael, and Hyacinth insisted on going too, which worried Francesca even more. Faced with her mother's insistence, Francesca decided to visit Michael alone before the others arrived, to ensure he was presentable and prepared for the unexpected visit. Upon arrival, Francesca found Michael enjoying a rare moment of peace. She nervously informed him that Violet was coming and that she believed they were involved in a romance. Michael, surprised but amused by the idea, tried to calm Francesca, though she was visibly agitated and horrified at the insinuation. Michael, with his usual sarcasm, tried to joke about the situation, but Francesca couldn't see the funny side. The arrival of Janet and Helen, Michael's mothers, at the Kilmartin house relieved some of the pressure on Francesca. They took control of the situation, ensuring that Michael's illness remained a secret to avoid damaging his reputation. With the arrival of the mothers, Francesca could focus on her own marriage plans without the constant worry and concern for Michael. As Michael recovered, he diligently assumed his new responsibilities as Earl. Francesca watched as Michael organized meetings with the Prime Minister, the family lawyer, and the estate manager, admiring his ability to handle his new obligations. Janet and Helen also ensured that Michael was ready for social events, insisting he visit the tailor for suitable suits for the season. During breakfast, Janet and Helen praised Michael for his recovery and reminded him that he must attend Violet's birthday party. Although initially reluctant, Michael accepted the need to participate in social life, understanding the importance of maintaining appearances and fulfilling his duties. Francesca and Michael continued their dynamic of mutual teasing, with Francesca enjoying the opportunity to irritate Michael. However, she also realized that Michael had changed, taking on his role as Earl with seriousness and dedication. Although she still saw Michael as her friend and confidant, a moment of mutual understanding made her question the exact nature of their relationship. Chapter 10. Francesca was at her mother's birthday party, surrounded by the relentless curiosity of London high society. Mrs. Featherington, a well-known gossip, approached to inquire about Michael, the new Earl of Kilmartin, before moving away. Francesca was already tired of repeating the same answers, as since Michael's presence at the party was announced, everyone wanted to know about him. Then appeared Lady Danbury, the blunt and grumpy old lady who used to command respect with her mere presence. Despite everything, Francesca found her entertaining. Lady Danbury, with her cane tapping the floor, complained about the mystery surrounding Violet's age and also asked directly about Michael. Francesca, trying to maintain her composure, explained that he hadn't arrived yet, though he was expected. Francesca watched as Lady Danbury approached Colin, her brother, leaving her alone again. Needing to escape more inquisitive questions, Francesca decided to join her sister Eloise and her sisters-in-law Kate and Sophie. Despite her best efforts to avoid talking about Michael, the conversation quickly turned to him. Eloise and the others joked about the situation, but Francesca was clearly frustrated. She realized that Michael's presence not only attracted the attention of all the marriageable women but also that of the married ones looking for an adventure. This only increased her impatience for his arrival to end the speculations. Finally, Michael appeared, surrounded by women who laughed coquettishly at his words. Francesca, seeing how everyone admired him, felt a mix of irritation and something she didn't want to recognize as jealousy. Sophie suggested that Francesca should publicly greet Michael to demonstrate the good relationship between them and her acceptance of the new Earl. Although reluctantly, Francesca agreed to the suggestion, aware of its logic. Before approaching Michael, Francesca decided to take a moment to compose herself. She headed to the ladies' room, hearing Eloise call her a coward under her breath. The word resonated in her mind, making her feel even more determined to face Michael and show that she hadn't lost her courage. As Francesca prepared for the inevitable encounter, she realized the new dynamic between her and Michael. They were no longer just friends and confidants. Now they were an earl and a widow, and their interactions would be observed and analyzed by everyone around them. Although she couldn't deny the attraction she felt, she knew she had to maintain her composure and face the situation with the dignity expected of her. Chapter 11. Michael had noticed Francesca the moment she entered the ballroom. She looked stunning in her blue dress with a new hairstyle. He watched as she exited through the northwest door, probably heading to the ladies' room. He always knew where Francesca was, as if he had a sixth sense for detecting her in any place. This constant awareness had caused him pain for years, and although distance had somewhat alleviated his torment, the memory of Francesca never completely faded, not even in far-off India. Now, back in London, Michael found himself surrounded by women competing for his attention. The high society ladies were eager to introduce their unmarried daughters, while the married women sought adventures. Although he initially found this amusing, he soon realized it would become a burden. Francesca returned to the ballroom, and Michael decided to approach her despite having to navigate through the crowd. When their eyes met, Francesca smiled slightly, and Michael felt his world turn upside down once more. Every time he thought he knew her completely, she changed in some way, keeping him perpetually fascinated and desperate. They met halfway and began to converse. Michael tried to maintain his composure, but Francesca quickly noticed something was bothering him. She amused herself with the situation, laughing at how the women chased him, but she didn't understand the pain her words caused him. Michael had cultivated his reputation as a libertine precisely to protect his true feelings for Francesca, so she would never suspect how much she meant to him. The conversation turned uncomfortable when Francesca suggested he dance with other women, hinting that he should consider marriage. Michael, hurt and bitter, responded with sarcasm, leading to a tense exchange between them. Finally, Francesca walked away, leaving Michael with a bitter smile as he contemplated the ballroom. The next day, Francesca felt awful about the previous night's conversation. The arrival of countless flowers at her house left her bewildered. Cards from admirers, ranging from the Marquis of Chester to the Viscount of Trevelstam, filled her drawing room. Janet, John's mother, supported her and encouraged her to accept her new reality as a desirable widow in the marriage market. When Michael entered the room and saw the flowers, he was irritated and jealous. Francesca explained that they were both in the same position of being pursued by society, but Michael couldn't hide his bitterness. Though he tried to apologize for his behavior the previous night, Francesca noticed something in him had changed. Despite the apologies, the tension between them didn't completely disappear, leaving Francesca wondering if they would ever have the same relationship as before. Chapter 12. Michael sat in his club, reflecting on his recent interactions with Francesca and the confusion he felt. Violet Bridgerton's birthday party had left him with a sense of irritation and regret. Francesca had been so happy at the mention of him finding love, but Michael could only respond with sarcasm and coldness. He knew Francesca, with her analytical mind, was already thinking of potential candidates for him, which he found pathetic and unbearable. Michael knew that soon Francesca would find a husband and leave the house, meaning he wouldn't have to see her every day. Although they would remain friends, the frequency of their encounters would drastically decrease. At the club, Sir Geoffrey Fowler approached Michael and started a trivial conversation but soon addressed the topic he was interested in, Francesca. Michael felt as if he had been punched when he heard Sir Geoffrey planned to court Francesca. He tried to remain calm, but the superficial talk about Francesca's double dowry and the expectation of getting rid of her filled him with anger. Later, Viscount Trevelstam arrived, also intending to court Francesca. Already irritated, Michael had to endure another conversation about Francesca's qualities and the advantages of marrying her. The situation worsened when Lord Hardwicke, a rude and drunken man, made lewd comments about Francesca, prompting Michael to physically attack him. The incident caught the attention of Colin Bridgerton, Francesca's brother, who invited Michael for a private conversation. Colin, with his keen observation and sharp intelligence, suggested that Michael should marry Francesca. Michael, trapped between his feelings and loyalty to his late cousin John, couldn't avoid the confrontation with Colin. Colin, always insightful, pointed out that Francesca might rush into choosing a husband due to her desire to have children. Michael, although he knew Francesca was strong enough to leave an unhappy marriage, realized Colin's concern wasn't unfounded. The conversation left Michael with a shocking revelation. He wanted to marry Francesca. However, the guilt and the awareness of having secretly wished for John's death kept him trapped in a moral dilemma. Finally, Michael left, knowing he could never stop thinking about Francesca and what could have been. Chapter 13. For an entire week, Francesca was surrounded by flowers, chocolates, and poems recited aloud at her doorstep. The attention she received surpassed even that of the younger and more beautiful debutantes, turning each day into an endless parade of suitors. Michael, for his part, couldn't stand this situation, finding it repulsive to constantly stumble upon Francesca's admirers. Although he also had admirers, it didn't seem fair that they couldn't visit him freely like Francesca's suitors. Michael felt trapped by the conversation he had had with Colin Bridgerton. The suggestion of marrying Francesca haunted him constantly. Although he had never seriously considered the idea before, he couldn't stop thinking about it now. He knew that if Colin suspected, eventually Francesca might find out too, and that terrified him. One night, during a ball at the Berwicks' house, Michael couldn't take his eyes off Francesca, who looked radiant in a green dress. His mother, Helen, suggested he dance with her, but he made an excuse, promising he would after finishing his drink. However, when he finally decided to seek her out, Francesca had disappeared from the ballroom. With his heart in a knot, Michael went to the garden, following the sound of Francesca's voice. He found her with Sir Geoffrey Fowler, who had overstepped his boundaries. Francesca, trapped against a tree, tried to escape Sir Geoffrey's advances. Seeing this, Michael charged at him with uncontrolled fury, knocking him to the ground and planting a boot on his chest. Francesca tried to calm Michael, fearing the consequences of such a violent confrontation. Michael, still furious, warned Sir Geoffrey that if he approached Francesca again, he would kill him. Terrified, Sir Geoffrey quickly slinked away, leaving them alone in the garden. Francesca, surprised and grateful, tried to apologize for having gone to the garden with Sir Geoffrey. Michael, still angry, told her it wasn't her fault. The intensity of the situation left her speechless. Michael, breathing heavily, seemed to be suffering. Francesca tried to console him, but he remained distant and hurt. Deciding it was best to return home, Francesca asked Michael to handle their apologies in the ballroom. As they headed to the carriage, she asked how he had known she was in the garden. Michael, with sadness in his voice, confessed that he was always watching her. That response left her thinking all night, feeling more confused than ever about her feelings for Michael. Chapter 14. 3 hours after returning home, Francesca heard the sound of the front door slamming shut, signaling that Michael was back. Janet and Helen had already arrived and told her that Michael had gone to the club after the ball, probably to avoid her. However, Francesca felt an inexplicable need to see and hear him, to make sure everything was okay between them. Without much thought, she stepped into the hallway as soon as she heard his footsteps on the stairs. Michael, visibly exhausted, was surprised to see her. Francesca was struck by how handsome he looked, with his tie loose and hair disheveled. Though she had nothing prepared to say, all she managed to articulate was a simple greeting. Michael, in a tired voice, replied that he was fine and just wanted to rest. Francesca seized the opportunity to thank him for defending her against Sir Geoffrey, although Michael responded sarcastically and paternalistically. Despite his apparent indifference, Francesca couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong between them. Determined, she asked him why he was so angry with her. Michael denied being angry, but Francesca persisted, convinced there was more to it. The tension between them grew until Michael, tired of Francesca's insistence, suggested she go to bed. However, Francesca refused to leave without a clear answer. The situation intensified when she followed him to his bedroom, an action that broke all norms of decorum. Inside the bedroom, Francesca confronted Michael, demanding an explanation for his behavior. Michael, with a voice full of contained anger, asked her to leave. But Francesca, her voice choked with emotion, asked if his anger was due to her intention to remarry. Michael remained silent, unable to articulate his feelings. Desperate to understand, Francesca expressed her doubts about whether remarrying would be a betrayal of John's memory. She confessed that she wanted to have a child, which was the main reason she considered a new marriage. Michael, moved by her anguish, felt a mix of pain and desire. Francesca turned away from Michael, unable to contain her emotions. Michael, driven by a mixture of feelings, approached her, placed his hands on her shoulders, and gently turned her around. In that moment, their eyes met, and everything changed. The desire they had suppressed for so long emerged with force. Michael kissed her, a soft and tempting kiss that awakened all her senses. The kiss intensified, and Francesca, though aware it was wrong, couldn't resist. Their bodies drew closer, and Michael explored her mouth with a passion contained for years. Francesca, lost in the intensity of the moment, let herself go, caressing him and responding to his kiss with equal fervor. When Michael slid his hand to her breast, Francesca froze, realizing the intimacy of the moment. With tremendous effort, she pulled away from him, murmuring that she couldn't continue. Michael, with a mix of desire and frustration, urged her to leave if she wasn't willing to go on. Francesca fled the bedroom, overwhelmed by her feelings. The next day, she decided to leave for her mother's house and, shortly after, to Scotland, fleeing the intensity of her emotions and the confusion she felt towards Michael. Chapter 15. Michael was reading the brief letter Francesca had left for Helen and Janet, unable to avoid thinking about how good she was at lying, especially when she could avoid saying things face to face and do it in writing instead. Francesca had invented an excuse about an urgent situation in Kilmartin, mentioning a spotted fever outbreak among the sheep that required her immediate attention. Michael knew this was just a facade to avoid saying goodbye in person. He didn't believe for a moment that there was a real urgency in Kilmartin. If there were, Francesca would have informed him since he was the Earl and she respected his position. The real reason for her departure was evident to Michael. She was running away. After the kiss they shared, Francesca was clearly uncomfortable and had decided to put distance between them. Although Janet and Helen mentioned that they missed her company, they showed no concern for her departure. Michael, on the other hand, sat in his study, struggling with a feeling of self-flagellation. He had kissed her, and that had ruined everything. For 6 years he had kept his feelings secret, playing his role perfectly. But with one kiss, everything had fallen apart. That kiss had surpassed all his fantasies, and now he suffered more than ever, aware of what he couldn't have. The friendship between them was irreparably damaged, and Francesca would strive to avoid him. Michael knew she went to Scotland to escape him. Michael still didn't fully understand how it all happened. He remembered clearly the moment he couldn't resist approaching her. He was so close he could touch her, and when she turned, he couldn't help but kiss her. That kiss was inevitable, something he simply had to do. As he reflected on this, Michael crumpled a sheet of paper in his hand, surrounded by crumpled papers on the floor of his study. He decided he had to do something to overcome his feelings, and decided to seek female company. 3 hours later, Michael arrived at the door of his club in a dreadful mood. He had visited La Belle Maison, a discreet and well-kept brothel, looking for a woman to blank out his mind. But none of the women there could satisfy him. He didn't want a blonde, a brunette, or a redhead. He realized he couldn't make love to any woman. He was trapped in his desire for Francesca, so he went to his club where he could drink in peace. At the club, he met Colin Bridgerton, who, to his dismay, decided to sit with him. Colin, with his usual joviality, mentioned Francesca's departure to Scotland, suggesting it was surprising given that the social season had just begun. Michael, irritated by the conversation, couldn't help feeling even more frustrated. Colin continued, hinting that Michael should marry Francesca. Michael, heartbroken, could only grunt in response. However, Colin was undeterred and kept pressing him, stating there was no reason he shouldn't marry her, except for the ones Michael made up. Finally, Colin revealed that he was engaged to Penelope Featherington, which took Michael completely by surprise. Colin explained that Francesca would want to know, and Michael agreed someone should inform her. Colin, seizing the opportunity, suggested Michael should personally go to Scotland to deliver the news. With nothing to lose, Michael decided to accept Colin's suggestion. It was time to face his feelings and try to convince Francesca to marry him. Several days later, Michael stood in front of the main door of Kilmartin, his childhood home. He felt a mix of nostalgia and determination as he prepared to face Francesca. He had rehearsed 1,000 times what he would say, and he was determined to convince her to marry him. Although he knew Francesca might resist, he was willing to fight for her love. Michael knocked on the door, hoping his arrival wasn't entirely unexpected. When the door opened, he felt his heart race. He was ready for anything, willing to do whatever it took to have a chance with Francesca. Chapter 16. Francesca was in Kilmartin, trying to immerse herself in daily tasks to forget the kiss Michael Stirling had given her in London. Though she handled the house affairs skillfully, nothing could distract her from the guilt and shame she felt for desiring Michael, the cousin and best friend of her late husband, John. She fled to Scotland, preferring to be a coward and avoid the temptation Michael represented. The routine in Kilmartin, far from calming her, left her nervous and agitated, leading her to seek long walks in the countryside to physically exhaust herself and find some peace. However, that day, upon returning to the mansion after a walk, she was met by Davies, the butler, who informed her she had an unexpected visitor. Michael had arrived. Despite her attempts to mentally prepare for the encounter, Francesca couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by Michael's presence in the pink salon. He, with his somewhat disheveled appearance from the journey, waited for her by a window. His figure, more primal and fierce than ever, took her breath away. Michael brought surprising news. His brother Colin was engaged to Penelope Featherington, something Francesca received with surprise and joy. But the real reason for Michael's visit was another. With unexpected firmness, he proposed marriage, arguing that the union was logical and beneficial for both. Francesca, stunned, tried to process the proposal. Despite her mixed feelings, Michael laid out the benefits of their union. She would keep her title and position, and wouldn't have to move. Michael approached her with determination, while Francesca wrestled with her emotions and tried to reject the idea, feeling everything he proposed was nonsensical. But Michael, undeterred, expressed that he had thought deeply about it and was convinced it was best for both. The tension between them increased. Francesca, desperate, tried to end the conversation and headed for the door, but Michael stopped her, gently touching her arm. The closeness and touch of Michael made her shiver. With a voice resonating deeply, he asked if she didn't want another kiss, leaving her even more confused and agitated as the weight of the situation fell upon her. Chapter 17. Michael found himself at an emotional and rational crossroads. He had tried to persuade Francesca with logical arguments but realized that only passion could convince her. He desired her deeply, a desire that had grown exponentially since that kiss in London. Although his love was unrequited, he decided he must seduce her to bind her to him irrevocably. With this determination, Michael approached Francesca, overflowing with sensuality and confidence. She, visibly nervous, tried to retreat, but Michael's closeness stopped her. As he caressed and kissed her, Francesca began to succumb to her own emotions and desires. Michael led her to a state of complete vulnerability, kissing and touching every part of her body with calculated precision yet full of fervor. Francesca, overwhelmed by the sensations, couldn't resist any longer. Her body responded to each caress from Michael, and her moans reflected uncontrollable pleasure. Michael, aware of his power over her, brought her to the brink of ecstasy. The passion between them became palpable, and the control Francesca tried to maintain vanished in the intensity of the moment. Michael, kneeling before her, kissed her intimately, causing Francesca to shudder with pleasure. Every kiss, every caress, brought her closer to the point of no return. When Francesca expressed her need, Michael knew he couldn't wait any longer. He lifted her and carried her to the rug, where he penetrated her with a deep and decisive motion. Both reached climax in an explosion of sensations, and Michael realized that what he felt for Francesca went beyond physical desire. It was a love that touched his soul. Chapter 18. The next morning was a storm of emotions for Francesca. She was immersed in a mix of hatred and regret for having given in to passion with Michael. Despite her desire to cry, she felt that tears were a luxury reserved for the innocent, and she no longer considered herself one of them. She hated herself for betraying her principles and her heart, giving in to a passion that surpassed everything she had known with her late husband, John. Guilt and desire mixed, leaving Francesca in a state of confusion and unrest. She didn't want to face Michael, and in an attempt to escape, left the house at dawn. She walked aimlessly, seeking any place where she could avoid encountering him. But the rain began to fall, and soon she was forced to take shelter under a tree, where Michael found her after hours of searching. Michael, soaked and worried, insisted they return to the house, but Francesca was reluctant and grumpy. Despite her anger, Michael helped her mount his horse and took her to the old gardener's house, the only nearby shelter. The storm raged, and the situation forced Francesca to accept his help. The gardener's cottage was small and cozy, with a single room. Michael, bloodied and muddied from improvising a shelter for his horse, tried to light a fire while Francesca watched him with a mix of fear and resentment. The tension between them was palpable, and although Michael tried to be kind, Francesca couldn't avoid her anger. As Michael removed his wet clothes, Francesca struggled to maintain her composure. Finally, she sat near the fire, still in her soaked dress. Michael, concerned for her health, insisted she come closer to the heat, but Francesca resisted. The conversation turned to the topic of marriage. Michael reminded her of his proposal, but Francesca, bitter, said she would consider it. The possibility of being pregnant added a layer of complexity to the situation. Francesca made it clear she would only marry him if it was for the sake of a baby, which enraged Michael. Despite the tension, Michael couldn't stop loving her. He approached her, asking for a kiss, and Francesca, despite everything, didn't pull away. When they finally drew close, the connection between them became undeniable, and Michael knew Francesca was his. Chapter 19. Francesca, her heart racing and body ablaze with desire, once again surrendered to Michael. Despite every rational part of her screaming to stop, her body craved more. Michael, with exploring hands, skillfully undressed Francesca, leaving her in only a thin camisole. The wet fabric clung to her body, becoming nearly transparent. Michael's gaze reflected intense emotion, and Francesca understood that his words were more than simple compliments. He lifted her in his arms and carried her to the bed, where he undressed her completely. Although Francesca had the chance to stop him, she couldn't resist drawing him in for another kiss. Undressing slowly, Francesca relished the power she wielded over Michael, watching his desire grow with each movement. Finally, with the camisole off, she stood on the bed, keeping herself just out of Michael's reach, who watched her with a mix of desperation and longing. Francesca decided to take control. She pushed Michael, making him fall back, and began to sensually tease him. Every touch, every whisper, every move was meant to drive Michael to the edge. As he watched her with burning eyes, Francesca reveled in her power, knowing he would do anything she asked. Michael, for his part, followed all her instructions, enjoying every moment. Francesca, still controlling the pace, approached him and allowed him to use one hand to touch her. The sensation was so intense that she finally permitted him to use both hands. Michael, obeying her commands, caressed and kissed her, driving her to a frenzy. Francesca, feeling herself losing control, finally allowed Michael to guide her. He lifted her and slowly lowered her onto his member, filling her completely. The sensation was overwhelming, and Francesca, breathless, began to move rhythmically. With each movement, the pleasure increased and both neared climax. Francesca screamed Michael's name as her body arched and moved to his rhythm. Finally, they both reached orgasm in an explosion of sensations. Afterwards, Michael, still whispering her name, asked her to lie beside him. Francesca, exhausted and satisfied, fell into a deep sleep, feeling safe and loved. Michael stayed awake, whispering her name and other words of love, gently stroking her hair. Chapter 20. The dawn brought uncertainty to Francesca. Despite having shared intimate moments with Michael, she found no peace. Logic dictated that after sharing a bed with him, she should accept his marriage proposal, especially considering the norms of their society. However, the decision wasn't clear to her. She feared facing her own feelings, paralyzed by uncertainty. Michael didn't understand her reluctance. The night before, after their encounter in the gardener's house, Francesca had found a note from him explaining that he would take Felix to the stable and return with another horse. But he only brought one, forcing her to share the saddle with him, this time riding behind him. Upon arriving home, he led her to the pink salon and closed the door, raising the issue of marriage again. Her refusal to give an immediate answer infuriated Michael, who reminded her of the implications of their intimacy. The next morning, Francesca didn't find Michael when she opened the door but a maid with a tray of food. Throughout the day, she received several trays of food but no message from him. This unexpected attention from Michael, who respected her request for time and space, confused her. After breakfast, Francesca left the house and spent hours walking through the fields, trying to escape her thoughts and Michael. However, fatigue and cold forced her to return. Entering, she found Michael in the library, who invited her for tea with a disarming affability. Michael attended to her with unexpected consideration, serving her tea and offering biscuits. He showed her a bouquet of delicate flowers, a gesture she didn't know how to interpret. Michael explained that he was courting her, making her feel she deserved more than just a physical encounter. However, his soft and seductive words disarmed her. The library, normally the least romantic place in the house, became a space charged with desire. Francesca, struggling with her own feelings, felt trapped between desire and reason. When he suggested he could kiss her goodbye, she felt unable to move. Michael, with a gentle touch and sweet words, left her even more confused. The farewell, with a simple kiss on the hand, became a moment laden with meaning. Finally, Michael whispered for her to dream of him but also offered to stay for more than a dream. Francesca, unable to resist, decided to stay, succumbing to Michael's charm, who showed her how romantic a library could be. Chapter 21. 3 weeks later, Francesca still hadn't resolved what to do. Michael had proposed marriage twice more, and she evaded the answer, knowing that accepting meant facing her feelings for him, for John, and for herself. She told herself she would only marry if she became pregnant, but she kept letting herself be seduced, seeking him out at night, even though she deceived herself into thinking she only sought company. Michael, increasingly impatient, hid his frustration behind romantic gestures. However, she perceived the subtle signs of his exasperation. After each avoided conversation about marriage, he made love to her with renewed urgency, mixing passion and anger. Francesca, unable to say yes or no, found herself trapped between desire and guilt, unable to break the cycle of nightly encounters. One morning, noticing the first signs of her menstruation, Francesca felt overwhelmed by sadness. She knew she wasn't pregnant, and although it was expected due to her irregular cycles, the impact was devastating. Michael sought her out that night, but she rejected him, claiming it wasn't the right time. Despite his disappointment, He understood and withdrew. The period didn't last long, and when it ended, Michael discreetly asked if it was over. Unable to lie to him, she confirmed it was. With a secret smile, he led her to bed, eager to resume their intimacy. But just as the passion was about to overflow, Francesca withdrew, seized by a sudden clarity. She pulled away from him, and although he tried to follow her, he finally understood the seriousness of her internal conflict. In a burst of desperation, Michael demanded to know why she stayed if she rejected him so much. Francesca, unable to find a coherent answer, realized she needed to leave. Michael, devastated, threw her out of the house, unable to endure the uncertainty of their relationship any longer. She fled the house and took refuge in the gazebo John had built for her. There, amidst tears and trembling, she confronted her feelings, wondering what she was really running from. Meanwhile, Michael, consumed by anger and desperation, trashed his room in a fit of rage. After hours of painful introspection, he realized he had revealed his love to Francesca in the worst possible way. He had loved her for 6 years, and it had all ended in a moment of uncontrolled fury. Francesca returned to the house and timidly knocked on Michael's door. He, surprised, let her in. She, soaked and trembling, quietly told him she would marry him if he still wanted her. Michael, exhausted and skeptical, asked why. Her unsure response made him demand a promise that she wouldn't back out. Francesca, sincere, promised. With renewed determination, Michael embraced her and took her to bed. That night, she was completely his, surrendering without reservation, accepting his love and desire. The tension and passion they had contained for so long overflowed, uniting them in an unbreakable bond. Chapter 22. Organizing the wedding with Michael turned out to be an unexpected challenge for Francesca, especially when it came to informing her family and friends. Though she had accepted the idea of marrying him, she still struggled to find the right words to explain it to others. Janet, who had always supported her decision to remarry, probably would never have considered Michael a potential candidate. Sitting in her office, Francesca tried to write the letters, crumpling one sheet after another in her failed attempts. Amid this process, Michael entered with the mail, handing her a letter from her mother. She was surprised to see 4 full pages, as her mother usually limited herself to 1 or 2 pages. With each line she read, Francesca grew more astonished. Colin and Penelope had married, moving the wedding up by more than a month, and her sister Eloise was also getting married to a man she had never met. Michael, observing her reaction, reassured her, reminding her that he had been in Scotland and that there probably hadn't been time to inform her earlier. Amid the surprise and slight irritation, Michael proposed that they marry that very day. His unexpected and bold proposal left her stunned. Although the idea of a rushed wedding unsettled her, Michael argued that in Scotland they didn't need banns and could marry quickly. In the end, Francesca agreed, though not without first imposing the condition of absolute fidelity. That night, Michael, pleased with the turn of events, reflected on his newfound status as a husband. The day had been a whirlwind of emotions, and now, as he undressed for bed, he felt overwhelmed by the reality of having Francesca as his wife. He opened the door connecting his bedroom to hers and paused for a moment, savoring the new reality of his right to be there. Francesca was standing by the window, wearing a blue nightgown that clung to her body. Michael, amazed, approached her. Seeing her hesitate, he reassured her, assuring her that everything had gone well. He kissed her, feeling a new sense of belonging and the absence of the furtiveness and desperation that had marked their previous encounters. He kissed her long and gently, sliding his hands over her body, savoring every moment. Francesca, still surprised by the intensity of her feelings, let herself be carried away, feeling pampered and adored. Michael caressed her tenderly, igniting her passion. He lifted her and carried her to the bed, where they continued their union, feeling more connected than ever. As they made love, Francesca realized that everything was different. The intensity of her feelings, the connection with Michael, everything was deeper and more meaningful. As she reached orgasm, she felt an explosion of pleasure, and Michael, ejaculating, screamed her name like a prayer. Afterward, as they snuggled together, Francesca reflected on the difference of that night. She was tired, satiated, but couldn't sleep. The feeling of having crossed a line, of having entered a new stage in her life, kept her awake, reflecting on what it meant to be Michael's wife and the depth of their connection. Chapter 23. Michael was at the breakfast table looking unwell, and Francesca, concerned, pointed it out. They had been married for 2 weeks, and that morning he had gotten up early, leaving his side of the bed cold. Francesca noted that Michael looked pale and slumped, suggesting he return to bed to rest, but he insisted he was fine, though his cough contradicted him. After several attempts to convince each other, Francesca, determined, stood up and ordered him back to bed. Despite his protests, she managed to get him to his bedroom, worried about his condition. 10 hours later, Francesca was terrified to see that Michael's fever wasn't going down. Although he insisted it wasn't malaria, his condition worsened, and she had no way to confirm if he was right. Francesca, without enough medical knowledge, felt powerless. She remembered what Michael had told her about his previous attacks and worried about the onset of this new episode. With Michael asleep, Francesca went out to the balcony to clear her head. The rain began to fall, intensifying quickly. Sitting there, Francesca let out her sobs, feeling overwhelmed by the possibility of losing Michael. The idea of being widowed a second time filled her with terror and despair. Reflecting on her feelings, she realized she loved Michael not just as a friend, but as a husband and lover. This love was as deep as what she had felt for John. As she cried and struggled with her emotions, Francesca wished Michael wouldn't die. The rain intensified, mirroring her mood. Finally, she decided she had to face her fear and fight for him. Michael woke up the next day, surprised to see daylight. He felt exhausted and sick, but he was aware of his surroundings. Francesca, entering the room quietly, was surprised to see him awake. Although Michael tried to downplay his condition, she noticed he had a fever. Touching his forehead, Francesca realized that the persistent fever meant it wasn't malaria. Malaria fever always subsided the day after the attack, which meant Michael was suffering from another illness. This revelation brought unexpected relief, as it meant he wasn't in immediate danger of dying. Francesca, emotional and relieved, explained to Michael that the persistent fever indicated it wasn't malaria. Though Michael had insisted on this, he now also understood and felt comforted. Francesca, still emotional, assured him he wasn't going to die and hurriedly left the room to attend to something urgent. Michael, puzzled but relieved by the news, watched as Francesca left the room, promising to return soon. Although he didn't fully understand her actions, he trusted that everything would get better. Chapter 24. Francesca was sitting at her desk, writing letters to inform her family of her recent marriage to Michael. She realized how difficult it would be to communicate this, especially to Janet, John's widow. Words escaped her, and in the end, she could only express that marrying Michael had seemed the right thing to do. While Francesca wrestled with her thoughts, Michael, though still weak, began to feel a little better after eating something light. He decided it was time to clean up and change clothes. He put on a clean nightshirt, and not wanting to get back into the sweaty sheets, called Reavers to have them changed. Then he sat in his armchair, turning it to look out the window. The day was sunny, and as he observed the gardens, he saw Francesca walking quickly, carrying something in her hand. Intrigued, Michael asked Reavers if he knew where Francesca was going. The servant informed him that she had asked the gardener to cut peonies, John's favorite flowers and the same ones she used in her wedding bouquet. Michael understood then that Francesca was heading to John's grave. Worried about the feelings of guilt Francesca might have, Michael got up and began to dress, determined to accompany and support her. He knew how guilt could eat away at the heart and didn't want Francesca to suffer like that. Though still weak, he felt it was his duty to help her find peace. In the cemetery, Francesca was sitting on a blanket, talking to John's grave. She talked about the weather, her walks in the rain, and finally confessed that she had started to feel something for someone else. With a mix of nervousness and sincerity, she revealed that she loved Michael and believed John would approve. As she spoke, she felt a kind of inner peace, a certainty that John would have wanted her and Michael to be together. Suddenly, Francesca heard a noise behind her. She turned and saw Michael, pale and weak, leaning against a tree. Seeing him, she felt a wave of relief and love. She asked if he had heard what she said and, confirming that he had, Francesca declared her love for him. Michael, with a hoarse and emotional voice, told her that he loved her too. They hugged tightly, both crying and laughing at the same time, feeling a deep and renewed connection. Francesca assured him that her love for John would always have a place in her heart, but that now, Michael was her present and future. They promised each other eternal love and, hand in hand, returned home, knowing they would face any challenge together. Francesca commented that she had planned to do something very romantic to confess her love, but Michael assured her that he didn't need grand gestures. All he needed was her love and presence. The love they shared was all they needed to face the future with hope and happiness. Though the journey had been difficult, both were ready to begin this new chapter together, supporting each other and building a life full of love and understanding. Epilogue. A letter written by Janet Stirling, the Dowager Countess of Kilmartin, to her nephew Michael Stirling reveals a deep and intimate message. Janet begins by acknowledging that the announcement of Michael's marriage to Francesca took her by surprise, unlike Helen, who saw it coming. However, Janet quickly clarifies that this surprise does not imply disapproval. She admits that although it took her a bit to understand at first, she now clearly sees that Michael and Francesca make a perfect couple, connecting on a higher level both in mind and soul. Janet reflects on the pain she still feels over the loss of her son John, who remains alive in her heart and whose death she continues to lament every day. This pain is mixed with a deep comfort knowing that both Michael and Francesca shared a genuine love for John. Janet offers her blessing to the couple and thanks Michael for allowing her son to love Francesca first, which for her is an act of immense generosity. The letter, dated June 1824, conveys not only Janet's blessing and acceptance of Michael and Francesca's marriage, but also an acknowledgement of the complex and deep emotional bonds that unite the three. Thank you for joining me in this summary of When He Was Wicked. I hope you enjoyed this literary journey and are encouraged to discover the full book. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more summaries and book recommendations. Until the next reading.